But after the Alma, the British and the French march south. And we're going to look at the map in any moment now. They march south in order to try and seize the port of Balaklava as a point of disembarkation and a point of logistics support, and then lay siege to the great city and port of Sevastopol. This is a contemporary map. Could you move it down just a tiny bit, Jamie? Because that's perfect. And there you can see, so as we look at it, off to the left, off screen to the left, is Sevastopol. And immediately to the south, exactly where we're looking at the moment, is the great port of Balaklava. Now, the Allies decide that they're going to march around Sevastopol. So instead of taking it on from the north, they decide that they're going to march in a great circle, what's so-called flank march, to the east and the south, capture Balaklava, on the map immediately in front of us, and then lay siege to Sevastopol using the logistics point of Balaklava, and later on Kadikoy, which is where the French will use, in order to allow their siege works to develop very nicely against the Russians, who are now cooped up inside Sevastopol. The problem is that as they march round, so Gorchakov sends out what he calls, under a man called Menshikov, sends out the Army of the Interior. And therefore, by the time that the British and the French get down to Balaklava, they've got Russians inside Sevastopol who are expecting to be besieged, off the screen to the left as we look at it. And then the Army of the Interior, moving around off the screen to the right. In other words, in the enormous area of the Crimea, which is not touched at all by the Allies. Now, the problem, therefore, becomes who is besieging whom? Because the British and the French have to put in their siege lines against Sevastopol. But at the same time, the Army of the Interior is menacing the flanks of the British, particularly because the British are the troops who are chosen to go on the eastern side of the siege lines, and to a lesser extent, the French. The great advantage that the Allies have, of course, is they have the fleets offshore who are supporting them, both the British and the French fleets who are supporting them offshore. The British and the French are infantry heavy, very infantry heavy. And if you were to, not have any particular interest or knowledge about the Crimean campaign and come at this without the inevitable propaganda from all sides on this, you would say, well, actually, nothing really matters very much except the siege of Sevastopol and the fall of Sevastopol in September 1855. You'd be right. That's where lots and lots of people are killed. The vast majority of people killed in September 1855, June and September 1855. However, the battles of maneuver, namely Alma, Balaklava, Little Inkerman, and the Chenea, which doesn't involve any British troops, have a glamour all of their own. The most glamorous of which is the Battle of Balaklava on the 25th of October, 1854, but it is probably the least significant of all the battles that I have talked about. Why is it important? Well, there's not much British cavalry, and there's only one regiment of French cavalry who are in theatre when the campaign starts. The British beefed that up to 10 regiments of cavalry, 5 regiments of light cavalry, 5 regiments of heavy cavalry. But nonetheless, this is only really tops about 4,000 sabres who are actually in the saddle at the time of the campaign. 60,000 British and French and a few Turks in and around Sevastopol. Obviously, a huge disparity of numbers, of which most of them are gunners and infantry. The two brigades of cavalry, there's the Heavy Brigade, who are dragoons and dragoon guardsmen. They consist of the 1st and the 2nd Dragoons and the 4th and the 5th Dragoon Guards regiments. Doesn't make much difference between what they are, whether they are Dragoon Guardsmen or not. Broadly, they wear a scarlet coat and they have a brass helmet on their head. The Light Cavalry, 5 regiments of Light Cavalry, 17th Lancers, 4th and 8th as 13th and 4th Light Dragoons, 11th, Those are the 10 regiments of cavalry which are available in the Heavy Brigade and the Light Brigade, the cavalry division. But I've got to tell you, we can't go any further really without introducing the 3 horsemen of the apocalypse, if you like, because the Light Brigade is commanded by our friend Lord Cardigan. There you are. You can see him in all his glory there. Lord Cardigan, who is the previous commanding officer of the 11th Hussars. The cavalry division, meanwhile, is commanded by his brother-in-law, Lord Lucan. There we are. Here's the man. Just I'm putting him out here, Lord Lucan. Now, the trouble with these two gentlemen is that they're both aristocrats. They're enormously significant people in British society. Let's not dwell too much upon them because there's a third person that I must introduce you to in a moment. But there is an argument between Lord Lucan and Lord Cardigan as to who is likely to command the cavalry division. Well, I mean, it seems extraordinary in this day and age, but Lord Cardigan has already commanded the 15th or King's Royal Hussars and has been sacked from the job by virtue of the fact that he has imprisoned and court-martialed one of his officers, Captain Watham, and when that court-martial goes wrong for the commanding officer and his grievous, dreadful conduct with the regiment, he is made to stand down. So appalling a commanding officer has he been that his standing down, his disciplinary action has been read out at the head of every regiment in the British Army. And broadly, every lieutenant colonel has been told, don't do it, boys, because you will lose the command of the regiment, whichever it is, if you do this sort of thing, and you will sacrifice the, who knows how much it is, but 20, maybe £25,000 that it's cost you to command that regiment. Well, you'd think that having lost command of a regiment, that Cardigan would never get another. Well, this is the 19th century. You might say it's the 21st century in some ways because these things are not entirely unknown to us today, but privilege, birth, schooling, etc. counts for so very much that he's reappointed in the 1840s, this time to command the 11th Hussars. They start off as 11th Dragoons, and he becomes a close friend of Prince Albert, obviously the husband of the Queen. And he commands the 11th Hussars with greater or lesser success for 16 years. There was scandal after scandal after scandal, not least of which is the Black Bottle affair, where he accuses an officer of introducing beer to the dinner table, which he hasn't done. And then the fact that he duels with one of his officers called Harvey Tuckett and wounds Captain Tuckett, Harvey Tuckett, with a ball from a rifled dueling pistol. Now, you'd think this can be attempted murder is a capital offence. He's tried in front of a court of the House of Lords and gets away with it again. I could spend the rest of the lecture talking about the things he does, and he gets away with them. Heaven knows how. The extraordinary thing is that by the 1850s, 1853, 1854, he's finished command of the 11th Hussars, and he's kicking his heels. He's never seen any action before. He's kicking his heels as to what he's going to do. And he is given command of the Light Cavalry Brigade and will in due course be promoted not just to Brigadier General, but also to Major General. Quite why is never clear. Unfortunately for him, Lord Lucan, whom I've shown you, who was commanding officer of the 17th Lancers, or Bingham's Dandies. That's the village of Bingham in Nottinghamshire that many wouldn't in the Vale of Beaver. He's a very serious soldier. He has seen some action before. He's not terribly up to date, but he's certainly not the dilettante that his brother-in-law is. And they argue bitterly over the fact that they are brother-in-laws. There's mistreatment by Cardigan of his wife. Preference given by Cardigan to his mistresses rather than his wife, to the sister of Lord Lucan. Oh, God, you can imagine, these are just what you don't want. Two people at loggerheads with each other, one the boss of the other, one a major general commanding a division, and the other one a major general, his subordinate, commanding a brigade. Oh, my life. Throw into all of this lot, then, the third horseman of the apocalypse, And we have here Captain Louis Nolan's pamphlet. He's a young officer. He is also he's also a 15th Hussar. He didn't serve under Cardigan, but nonetheless, he's an interesting man. He's had service in the Austrian army before joining the British army, and he is, I have to say, I think I'd find him extremely difficult to handle if I were his superior. Very uppity, has written extensively about the use of cavalry and the training of cavalry, and he comes out to the Crimea as an aide-de-camp to Lord Raglan, who is the commander-in-chief. Now, Lord Raglan is one of those people that you either like or you dislike. Most people are critical of him. However, his supporters are enormously loyal to him. And Louis Nolan falls into the camp of being very, very loyal to the commander-in-chief and also very critical of the cavalry division commander, namely Lord Lucan. You can see where the red line is on the map, which is the fortifications, the more modern fortifications of 1855, but it doesn't matter. That line broadly shows the line of communication, the road from Balaklava in the south, right the way through what the British and the French call the South Valley, which we're looking at the moment, and then up onto the hillside, with the material, the guns, the ammunition, every nail, every bullet, every tin of bully beef that is consumed by the British in the Crimea has to come along this road from Balaklava. Well, it's blinking obvious. The Russian Army of the Interior have every intention, of course, of trying to cut the lines of communication. If the Russians can get troops down from the right side of the screen as we look at it, in and towards Balaklava, then they are going to be in a position to make sure that the British simply can't operate up on the Fedokini Heights, up on the Sapoon, the high ground where the British guns and the French guns are firing in towards Sevastopol, where the Russians are cooped up under siege. So, in order to try and defend this piece of ground, the Royal Marines and the Royal Marine Artillery are established inside the port of Balaklava with their guns and their infantry facing up to the north, holding the port. Immediately above the port, you can see the sort of shallow V in blue that I put on the map. There is the Highland Brigade, so the 42nd, the 79th, and the 93rd Highland Regiments, who have barely been touched at the Alma and are still in pretty good shape. And they are stationed in actually what's a pretty blinking cushy post down there in order to try and react to any threat to the port itself, and obviously to operate in liaison with the Royal Marine Artillery and the Royal Marine Light Infantry. Then, come further up the map, you can see two pink arrows, come back to them in a moment, and then there are 4 little yellow triangles on the map. There should be 6, but 5 and 6 don't matter because these are redoubts from the right, 1, 2, 3, 4, which have been dug by the British and the Turks, and then Turkish garrisons, small Turkish garrisons, maybe about 150 men apiece, plus up to 4 guns placed in each of these redoubts, which are manned by British non-commissioned officers of the Royal Artillery. Now, 5 and 6 are off the map and they don't matter because they haven't been armed. In other words, there aren't troops in them and they haven't got guns. But 1 up on Can Robes Hill, 2, 3, and 4 will become the absolute epicenter of one of the events that I'm about to describe. Russians are cavalry heavy, very different from the Allies. They've got lots and lots of cavalry. They've got everything. They've got everything from Cossacks. So the Cossacks have weaponry and uniforms which is distinctive for them. So look at this. This, for instance, I'm very, very pleased to have this. This is a Cossack pistol. It's a regular Cossack pistol, so this is the sort of troops that we'll be talking about in a moment. Notice there's no trigger guard on it. You can always tell a Cossack weapon because there's no ramrod. Now, obviously, you need a ramrod to fire a percussion cap weapon like this. Well, why is there no ramrod underneath the weapon? Because the Cossack keeps his ramrod tucked down inside his boot. That's the way that they do it. That's just the way that they do it. This little thing, which strangely is made in Belgium, as you would expect, beautifully made, but is also rifled, rather surprisingly, making this really quite a lethal weapon in the hands of a Cossack marksman. The ordinary cavalry look a bit like our cavalry, and there's not a great deal of difference. They wear heavy grey greatcoats and they wear shakos rather than the helmets that our troops wear, but they carry a much more conventional. This is a Russian cavalry pistol. It's actually dated 1856, so I suspect that this was not used in the Crimea. It might have been, but I suspect not. Maybe just at the end. Here's the conventional ramrod, as we've talked about, percussion cap weapon, and much less lethal than the Cossack weapon. Notice also here the pommel of the weapon, which of course, once you've fired it, is reversed and becomes an extremely capable club for seeing off your opponent. Now, there is a plan made to use the cavalry heavy elements of the freshly reinforced Russian army, use the cavalry regiments to try and come and sweep down from the right-hand side of the screen through into South Valley. So let me describe that for you. That's the valley where the pink arrows are showing, pointing up to 2 o'clock, and across the Causeway Heights. The Causeway Heights is the road which is dotted with the yellow redoubts, as mentioned, and then perhaps also to lap over slightly into North Valley, which is the valley described by the 2 green markers, which we'll talk about much more in a moment. Now, the Russians know that if they can get cavalry down here quick enough, and if they can actually capture these redoubts, then they can not only use the British guns that they capture, maybe, but they can get their own guns in there. If they can hold these redoubts, then they can seriously embarrass the British logistics elements and make life almost impossible for the siege to continue, at least as far as the British are concerned. I do not believe that Rzyhov's plan is designed to be an assault actually on Balaklava, on the port. I believe there are 2 phases to the plan. One phase on the 25th, which is going to be an armed reconnaissance of Balaklava. And then the second phase, the next day on the 26th of October, which is another armed reconnaissance up towards the Inkerman position. They come plunging in from right to left. And they immediately start to take the redoubts, one on Canrobers Hill to the right, 2, 3, and 4. One resists. It's quite a significant edifice. If you go there, if you're lucky enough to go there, maybe not just at the moment, you'll see that the redoubt on Canrobers Hill is still there. You can see it perfectly. 2 and 3, these all overlap and interlock with 9 and 12-pound guns inside them. Similarly, 4, but this little sort of triangle of 1, 2, and 3 is a particularly dangerous, nasty bit of ground to come down. The Turks hold out. They hold out quite well in redoubt number 1, in other words, extreme right redoubt. But very quickly, redoubts 2 and 3 are surrounded by infantry. The Azov regiment, not the Johnny-come-latelys that we're hearing about in the news at the moment, but the proper old-fashioned, fine old infantry regiment, and the Suzdal regiment are responsible for taking over those 2 redoubts. And the Russians very quickly occupy them and start to wonder what they're going to do with the British guns, which haven't been spiked. But having got all this lot in hand, the word, and this is the early morning of the 25th of October, really about dawn, so something like 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, word goes up to Raglan, who is right off the screen to our left as we're looking at it. He's sitting up, excuse me, he's sitting up on the Sapoon, watching what's going on. And he realizes that far from being the false alarms, of which there have been many over the previous days and weeks, this is a very serious thrust, which could endanger Balaklava to the south. He doesn't need to tell Sir Colin Campbell, who is the commander of the Highland Brigade, to stand to. Colin Campbell, takes his 93rd or Sutherland Highland Regiment and starts moving them up to the mouth of Balaklava, as described by the blue bits of paper on the map. Meanwhile, a warning order goes out to the 4th Division, commanded by Sir George Cathcart, and the Guards Brigade, who are up on the Sapoon, not very far away from where Lord Raglan is commanding things. And he says to Cathcart, for God's sake, get your infantry up here, get them on the road in light order, and run them as hard as you can down to the edge of the Sapoon. Well, there we are. He's up on the Sapoon. 4th Division are told, get moving. The 4th Division have just come off trenches. They're exhausted, they're tired, they're knackered, and all the rest of it. And they're told, just get cracking. Well, some do. Elements of the Guards, as always, the good old faithful Guards, do as they're told, and they start trotting along the Sapoon down towards the Balaklava position. But all the while, the Russian cavalry are leaking down into the valley and heading towards the port of Balaklava. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to disabuse anyone of what happens next, but a very great deal of fuss has been made of what they call the Thin Red Line, the stand of the 93rd or Sutherland Highlanders, immediately before Balaklava on the morning of the 25th of October, 1854. If you ask people to name British military victories, they would probably name the Thin Red Line well up there amongst those very distinguished elements that we've talked about. Fact remains that the 93rd are critically supported by W Battery of the Royal Artillery and by C Troop of the Royal Horse Artillery. So about 16 towed guns, 9-pound guns, which are going to be absolutely critical in turning the Russian cavalry back. The 93rd deploy. They deploy into line along the blue paper I've shown you. This is a regiment, probably about 670 effectives, and they fire a volley at the Rzyhov cavalry, which are coming obliquely at them, so from around about 2 o'clock now, which probably does not have any effect on the Russians whatsoever. These are new rifles. The 93rd are clearly unused to handling them, and they fire too far away with the Minier rifle. As they do so, however, W Battery and C Troop, they open fire, first of all with round shot, then with common shell, and then with shrapnel at the Russians. And as the cavalry come down, the Russian cavalry come down the slope. So the Russian commanding officers and squadron commanders realize that actually this is enough for the armed reconnaissance. They get another volley of Minier fire from the 93rd Regiment, possibly a third. By this stage, saddles are being emptied, and they turn back and leak back almost due north now. So rather than coming in at 2 o'clock, they're moving in back around about 12 o'clock or maybe 1 o'clock between the redoubts that have been captured. So 2 and 3, which are above each other on the right, and then 4 on the left. And as the cavalry, the Russian cavalry come back up the hill, so it's the turn, suddenly, of the Heavy Cavalry Brigade under the command of Sir James York Scarlett. Well, thank God, we've got steady-nerved, sensible cavalrymen who are there in the valley. They're inside their camp, and they suddenly, this is exactly what a cavalryman wants. He's had every opportunity to practice this stuff in the past, but very, very seldom has he had the chance physically to get stuck in. Well, the cavalry form up into the Heavy Brigade form up into 2 lines. The Inniskillens, so the 6th Dragoons, and the Scots Greys, the 2nd Dragoons leading. 4th and 5th Dragoon Guards in the second wave, and then the 1st or Royal Dragoons who will carry out a flanking attack. And they carry out nothing short of brilliant. Forgive me getting excited about this, ladies and gentlemen, but sometimes you do wonder about the British cavalry. Well, they get it dead right. 400 or so horsemen, terribly under strength, this regiment, go plummeting right into the flank right into the flank of the Russians and tumble them to ruin. But Grey Neville manages to get himself unhorsed, trampled. I've seen his helmet. His helmet is cut about with saber cuts. It's been trampled by a horse. He's in a terrible state. He gets a lance through the lungs, and he's eventually taken away, put on a ship. He's taken down to Balaklava, put on a ship, sent away to Balaklava. To Scutari on the other side of the Black Sea, to Turkey, to try and get better. And we'll leave him there. But he is the only officer who actually dies as a result of this particular action. It's very hard to know what the casualties were. Certainly, 400 or so British horsemen throw back a couple of thousand Russians. And as they do so, the Russians move back into North Valley. So we can see where the green bits of paper are. At the same time, they're in North Valley. So the Russian infantry are coming up in order to try and make this a desperately difficult target to take on. On the south side, so around the redoubts, the yellow triangles that I've got, there's a regiment of infantry there, a regiment of rifles, a 4th rifle down to the south there, and then across the other side of the valley, Jabritsky has got a heavy battery of artillery, 2 more regiments of Russian artillery, a regiment of Russian riflemen. And then, if you look down to the right-hand side, to the right-hand green arrow, just about where it points there, so the Don Cossack battery, number 3 Don Cossack battery, so regular Cossack artillerymen, they bring a number of guns, probably 8, which line the valley as we are looking at it from right to left. So they're firing up the valley, straight into the mouth of any British cavalry, which might choose to try and dislodge them. Infantry now along the causeway heights, where the little yellow triangles are, they're looking south, down into South Valley, and their artillery pieces are facing down to the south. To their north, above the green arrows on the Fedukini Heights, we've got a lot more infantry and a lot more guns, and then down in the valley, facing up the valley, and those facing west, is a battery of Don Cossack guns. The Russian cavalry are leaping over the top of the hill, and off to the left of the pink pieces of paper and slightly more to the north, so 12 o'clock from those pieces of paper, the Light Cavalry Brigade are waiting. They're milling around redoubts 5 and 6, which are not armed. They're waiting for the British infantry to come up, which it doesn't. They've seen what's happened to the Heavy Brigade, and now suddenly, here is another target, a target of utterly disorganized Russian cavalry who are masking the guns, any guns that there are in the valley, and certainly the guns behind them on the causeway heights, and yet they don't take the opportunity to charge. I'm smiting my forehead it's extraordinary that Cardigan doesn't take his brigade and do what his mucker Scarlett has just done with the Heavy Brigade. Instead, he sits there. And it's almost as if he's sulking, waiting for orders from the divisional commander, his brother-in-law, Lucan. Well, Scarlett hasn't needed orders. He sees the target of opportunity and he seizes it. Oh, God, Lordy Lord. Cardigan completely misses the opportunity. Time goes by, get towards noon, and then on towards 1 o'clock. The Russians are now reinforcing their position. They've sorted out what's going on. And suddenly, Lord Raglan, who's up to the left of the screen, he looks down, Commander-in-Chief, and says, oh, my life, they're carrying our guns away. They're carrying the British guns away. We can't do that. We simply can't allow those guns to be taken away. His Lord and Master Lord Wellington, Arthur Wellesley, had never lost a gun. And then the most famous order in the history of the British Army is given. Lord Raglan wishes the cavalry to advance rapidly to the front, follow the enemy, and try to prevent the enemy carrying away the guns. Troop horse artillery may accompany. French cavalry is on your left. Immediate. Now, if a lance corporal had written that warning order on a private to lance corporal card, I'd have failed him. I'd have sent him back to his company as a private. Wishes the cavalry to advance rapidly to the front. Well, what front? if you're above those pink arrows there on the map and you're looking down the valley, where's the front? Is it to the south? Is it into the valley? Is it along the causeway heights? What's wrong, for pity's sake, with the point of a compass? Follow the enemy. Well, what enemy? What enemy is to be followed? Yes, there's some cavalry that's making off right over to the right-hand side of the screen, beyond where the green arrows are pointing. But this is just shocking. Raglan tells the Captain Louis Nolan, the aide-de-camp, tell Lord Lucan the cavalry is to attack immediately. Well, Louis Nolan comes charging down on his beautiful thoroughbred. I believe it's a grey horse. Tell me if I'm wrong. Down off the high ground. He comes down with this order, and he meets both the divisional commander and the brigade commander. So at the west end of the North Valley. Go to the pink ribbons there. Come up north of that, just before the map disappears. They're there. They're down in the valley. They're in the bottom of the valley. They're looking around. They're not on the causeway heights to the south because they'll be picked off by the Russian guns opposite on the Fedekini. And this uppity young pup arrives between these two quarrelsome, sulky, silly men, neither of whom has actually taken part in the charge of the Heavy Brigade a few hours before, a couple of hours before, but both realizing that the Russians should be on the back foot. And yet suddenly, it looks as the Russians are reinforcing. They're holding the redoubts above them. And it looks reasonably clear as if the Russians are going to make a success of this. Now, there is a terribly ugly, insubordinate incident. I won't go through it in detail, but the essence is this. Neither of the major generals, neither the commander of the division nor the brigade commander of the Light Cavalry Brigade know what on earth Raglan wants them to do. This is the job of the aide-de-camp. The aide-de-camp is to come down and explain exactly what is meant to happen. He doesn't. He comes down and he behaves like an intemperate subaltern rather than the mature and extremely experienced captain that he actually is. He's rude. He's so rude that, well, I mean, in his position, I'd have had the man under arrest in about, quicker than somewhat. But when the two commanders cannot decide what on earth the order means, then Louis Nolan simply says, look, there are your guns, my lord. There is your enemy. Pointing down the valley where the green arrows are pointing towards an enemy battery which they can't see, which the two commanders can't see, but which Nolan must have seen from the high ground. The cavalry are told, right, form up, lads, get ready, we're going to charge. Excellent, outstanding. That's just what you want to hear as a cavalryman. So the leading regiments, the 17th Lancers on the left, the 13th Light Dragoons on the right, the 11th Hussars who are behind, and the two supporting regiments, two supporting Hussar regiments, they form up in two lines, ready to charge off down the valley. Now, I think it's quite a good start point. It makes sense to shake out there. It also makes sense that once you start, that you wheel to the right, you come over the causeway heights and you get into the South Valley and stop the guns being carried away. However, it doesn't happen. The cavalry gets moving. Guns are firing at them now from two sides and eventually straight into their mouths. So they're looking straight down at the Don Cossack back. On they push, they go down the valley. Eventually the lances come down, the sabres are made ready, and they get in amongst the Russian guns with the most extraordinary dash. The Light Brigade get in amongst the guns. They sabre the gunners. But they fail to spike the wretched things. They fail even to take the wheels off or break up the tools, the gunners' tools. Again, the British cavalry, they're so good when they're good and so bad when they're bad. Cardigan is there. He leads the brigade in, but he doesn't seem to see that there's any need to reform the brigade and try and protect them from the ravaging Russian lancers and Russian hussars who are charging down upon them. Many different accounts of what happens in Balaklava that day. There are two Victoria Crosses that are won by the Light Brigade. And having been cut to pieces by the Russian guns on either side and by the Russian riflemen, most particularly by the Russian riflemen, they're only saved, really, by the charge of the Chasseurs d'Afrique. They're a French cavalry regiment, always off to the flank, and they managed to get up onto the Fedekini Hills. And on the Fedekini Hills, they managed to silence the main Russian battery, which allows the brigade to get back. But the losses are extraordinary. The whole thing had lasted no more than 30 minutes, but it had ruined the brigade and achieved absolutely nothing. Killed a few Russians, but nothing more than that. Of the 51 officers and 610 men who charged down the valley, 9 officers and 93 men have been killed, 11 officers and 116 men wounded, 2 officers and 56 men have been taken prisoner. Now, there's a pretty serious casualty, but that's not the point. The people, the things, the creatures that had suffered were the horses, and the wiping out of the horses. It's not 100%. That's not right to say, but the fact remains that the cavalry brigade, Light Cavalry Brigade, at the end of this action, are no longer a cavalry brigade. They're not combat effective. They may have the manpower, but they certainly don't have the horses ever to do this again. Lord Raglan, standing up on the hill, turns to Bosquet, the Frenchman, with him and says, "What have we done?" And the French officer says, "C'est magnifique, mais ce n'est pas la guerre." It's magnificent, but it's not war. You don't do this with troops like this. This is crazy. This is mad. Brigade's ruined. The cavalry, the Heavy Cavalry Brigade, have carried out an enormously successful operation in the morning. The Light Cavalry Brigade have gallantly and bravely disgraced themselves. It's not the soldiers. There's no lack of courage from the troops. They're excellent soldiers, excellent regiments. That the officers, the brigade and divisional level commanders, have simply let them down. I've shown you bits and pieces. I cannot put my hand on my heart and say that I've actually got anything from the Battle of Balaklava. However, the uniform behind me, I talked about this last week, belonged to an infantry officer in the 95th Regiment called Anthony Morgan. Anthony Morgan watched the battle. He didn't take part in it. He watched it. He was on a carrying party up on the Col, watching what was going on. He wrote some diaries. And he talked to his grandson, probably about 1900, 1903, about the charge that he had seen. The grandson had a great memory. The grandfather and the grandson between them made some notes. And I met the grandson. He was an old man when I met him in 1983, but he had listened to his grandfather, who fought at Alma, fought at Inkerman, fought at Little Inkerman, and watched the Light Cavalry Brigade charge. Now, when he got hold of the uniform, I was told that there were 2 swords that went with them, but the swords have been stolen in a robbery. Why would an officer have? Well, here we are. Look, here's Morgan's sword. This turned up some 15 years ago, and therefore this is the sword. It's got his name and his regiment here and the engagements that he was in. But I knew there was a second sword. I don't know anything more about it, except that it did say in his diaries, it said that after the battle that he watched in this extraordinary, magnificent spectacle, that he'd gone down and he picked up a sword from the French cavalry, probably therefore the Chasseurs d'Afrique, who had charged that day. Now, this wouldn't stand up in court, I appreciate it, but look, here it is. Bought that at the same time as I got Morgan's sword. This is a sword of a French Light Cavalry Regiment, the Chasseurs d'Afrique. It's the 1822 Light Pattern Cavalry Sword. Light Cavalry pattern sword, sorry, and it came along with Morgan's sword. I say it won't stand up under cross-examination, but I do believe that this is a French cavalry saber that was carried on the afternoon of the 25th of October, 1854, and may well have been thrown into the relevant to the saving of the Light Cavalry Brigade as they returned east to west up the infamous Valley of Death.